I've used a computer as my primary instrument for years, and I love it. It's the best. I can never imagine a scenario where I don't have it in my workflow in some way. Every piece of my art passes through at least one phase of digital manipulation. However, it does have its drawbacks, as it lends itself to being perfectly timed and have and based tempos. It loves for everything to be on rails and be like super computer like, which can completely work in your favor if you're making conventional music. As a horror enthusiast and horror content creator, I've always loved the sound of horror movies. I feel like the sound and the atmospheres and the ambient and haunting scores, the complex audio environments and textures, I feel like it adds so much to the experience of that movie. And I want those sounds. I want those in my artistic tool bag. I want to be able to conjure those emotions and those emotional cues to use in my own videos. The thing about a lot of those sounds, though, is they don't conform to any tempo, and that drives a huge wrench into my computer-driven workflow. I had seen artists, Foley artists, I suppose, uh, creating all kinds of crazy and weird sounds like dragging a bow across saw blades and all kinds of weird stuff to get amazing sounds. And I've done that, of course, just recorded samples and dropped them into the timeline, but I still felt constrained by the tempo. I was veering further into the horror soundscape headspace, and I fully realized how my computer can bend the experience to something more robotic and unrelatable, and altogether less interesting. It felt counterintuitive to make a long form piece of audio in this perfection obsessed computer environment. I wanted to get into a way more organic headspace. So I decided I would eliminate the computer altogether. I'll still edit in the computer, but as far as an instrument goes, it will be uh, this thing that I've got to create. So I'll still be using my computer, but the rails are off and the tempo is flexible and free form. Now I needed an instrument, something super analog and untethered by programming, something spooky. I wanted to make all of those Foley horror sounds, but be organized and manageable into something that I could play as an instrument. After a bunch of research, I found that I could mount a microphone inside of a box and create a bunch of these sounds. I started imagining an instrument that a full-on crazy chainsaw guy might use to score his own personal murder flicks. Firstly, I needed a box, so immediately I made the trip down to the Goodwill on 28th Street, and I found this, I believe, a former silverware box, and I got it for a great price, just a couple of bucks. I was pretty jazzed about getting such a great prototype on the first place I went to. Brought it home, plopped it down onto my workbench, and raided my prop collection and started adding all these little textures to it. And I had an old, unreliable echo pedal, so I mounted it inside there and I ran the knobs out the front as well as the stop switch. Originally, I had used like just a full-on microphone inside there with a small preamp, but ultimately I upgraded it to a piezo mic. A piezo mic is a super cheap contact mic. When it's mounted inside a box like this, it creates like a microscope for sound. And it can take the smallest sound and build it up into this huge wall of spooky sound. And this is my nightmare box. The main feature here is a circular saw blade. This is a former pulley and a little handle that I found that looked cool and allows me to tighten it or loosen it. Along the edges of the circular saw blade, I've inserted springs. Also, there are guitar strings running through the springs to give us a little extra texture. Along the edge here, I have more saw blades. Each one of these has a different tone. Depending on how far out I allow it to go, the different tone it'll create. And on the edge here, I have a spring that gives a nice little texture when it gets struck, when this last blade gets struck, or if you directly manipulate it. Along the top here, I have just standard nails of 3 different sizes, actually 6 different sizes. I originally drilled out the holes, then punched them through and super glued them in there. They have a fun sound. Along the top, I've got a couple of bolts punched through. Each of them have a little piece of guitar string of different lengths, like a tree would grow, but each of those also produce a nice sound. There's also a guitar string running pole to pole, so you can get a nice sound out of it as well. You can adjust the tone of that sound by putting pressure on either one of the posts. In addition, you can use the main feature spring here to rub up against it. Along the bottom, I adhered some sandpaper to give us that texture. There's also a zip tie. I like all the various metal sounds that it gives you. I've also got strings going along the edges. Each string has a different tone. There's also large springs going along the sides. Also, I think it's important to use different tools as well. This piece that I've been using was formerly from a beard trimmer, but I think it works really well in its new role as a little noise maker. It's got a rough edge along one side. The other sides are flat, but it feels nice and it's made of good metal. This piece up top is a spring from an old soldering iron. In addition to this tool, I've also got a vintage dog tag from 1967 from Pine Bluff, which I think is pretty cool. It has a nice sound too. In addition to the two tools that I have been using, I've also got this half of a pair of scissors that works really nicely. And again, another tool to use on the box is a violin bow. Along the front here, I've got our power switch, as well as our main volume for a piezo microphone that's mounted inside there. These are the three adjustment knobs for the echo pedal, as well as the stomp switch to turn it on and off. I've also run the LED to indicate whether it's on and off. I do use a couple of external devices in conjunction with the Nightmare box. I've got, of course, my looper, as well as a reverb and delay option. So first I'm going to use the looper. Using a looper is a great way to build a environment, to build it up into something super spooky. And then you can just layer on top of that. This is what it sounds like when I add reverb to it. this is what it sounds like with the echo added to it. And that's the Nightmare Box. I really love how it turned out. I'm amazed by the crazy sounds I can get out of this thing. I'm banging around on junk, and it's coming up with these haunting tones that I was after. It super impressed me, and I have a bunch of plans to make more and to add on to this one. I've got like three more boxes waiting in the wings to get all spooked up. Also, to bring it around full circle, I've recorded a bunch of samples from the box and chopped it up in my DAW and created a virtual instrument out of it, so I could essentially play my Nightmare Box on my piano or even program it into my timeline. It's the best of both worlds. It's super cool. Making the changeover from merely programming the sound to actually performing the sound was a huge thing for me. It was immensely inspiring and an important step for me. I even based an entire album around this sound. I'll leave links down in the description so you can take a listen or purchase it if you like. Finally, what I will say, if you ever find yourself locked into a rut, get rid of some of those amenities and features that you're used to. It'll be harder to produce, but it'll be alive. It's a lot easier to relate to something that's alive than to relate to something that's unrealistically reliable.